I've been asked several times to show you how to create a single-ended spray, which traditionally is a design that's sent to a funeral, often from family friends or close family members. And it's a design that is longer on one side than the other, as opposed to a double-ended spray which has equal length on both sides. Now, I've experimented a bit with turning the camera on an angle so that we're looking down on the design when we're creating it, and hopefully it will give you a better understanding on how to create a single-ended spray. If it turns out it's a disaster and we can't see the design very clearly, then we'll reshoot a video later next week. But for now, we're going to be using this gorgeous country blue rose to create a single-ended funeral spray in an average size that would be great for somebody learning how to do floral design. Let's get started. So I'm going to start by just explaining to you why I've chosen the materials that I've got today. And we'll start by looking at what I'm calling my focal flower. Now I'm just holding 3 in my hand. I might use more as the design goes along, but this is my largest flower. So this we tend to refer to as the focal flower. And this is a wonderful, almost a cerise pink rose. This is a Colombian multi-headed rose. You'll see it's got that really interesting multi-petal effect there in the middle. One of the most popular roses that we use for weddings. Then I've also got some white gerbera. This is going to create my focal line and make your eye travel through the centre of the design from the bottom right through from one end to the other. Then we have 2 different colours of spray carnations, and I've chosen these because we get a variety in sizes of heads. So you'll see that some heads are small, some heads are larger, and you can break them down into individual heads so that we have lots of flowers from that one stem. And I've chosen 2 colour combinations, white to help connect with the gerbera, and then that lavender sort of purple colour to help bring a link together with that main focal rose that I'm going to be using in the focal area. And then I've got some lisianthus, again quite similar to the spray carnation, but it gives you a different size and shape of head. If you don't have spray carnations, then the lisianthus is a fantastic alternative. And again, I'm using white, so we've got those 2 there in the white. Then to give me a softer appearance and to give a country feel to the design, I'm going to use the Aster or the September flower to give me that beautiful sort of soft, floaty and airy look that I like to use to create a soft design for the single-ended spray. But it's not essential that you use something like this. You can get away without using it. I just think it gives a really pretty effect. Quite fashionable at the moment to have that meadow country look to floral designs. That's all my flower selection. We'll have a look in a minute at some foliages. So now we're back and we're looking at the different types of foliage I've got. And to create my outline, I've got this lovely long piece of soft ruscus. That's a great one to use for single and double-ended sprays. And we use this a lot as well in hand-tied bouquets. And you'll see that when I'm cleaning off the bottoms of the stems of the ruscus, we often get small pieces of spare ruscus left over, and I always keep these. These have been submerged in water just to make sure they're nice and turgid. We keep all small pieces of foliage like this to use in funeral designs or small posies, buttonholes, whatever we happen to be doing in work this week. So same with the myrtle, any small pieces that have come off, any hand tied or larger arrangements we've been doing, we've kept those to one side as well. So another foliage that I'm going to be using is myrtle. Quite similar in its colour and texture to the ruscus, so I have to be careful that I don't use too much of these because they will fight for attention and will end up creating quite a messy design. I need something that breaks up the texture and the colour. And that's why I've chosen the leather leaf. So probably a very popular, probably a foliage that's more suitable So I would say that the leather leaf is more of a florist foliage, but you could change it and use some ferns or some palm leaves instead. But it's a real good staple for a florist shop. And I think that's probably going to be my foliage selection. Should I feel the need to add something in later on, we'll talk through it as I go through and progress through the video. So I would say that the leather leaf is more of a florist foliage, but you could change it and use some ferns or some palm leaves instead. But it's a real good staple for a florist shop. And I think that's probably going to be my foliage selection. Should I feel the need to add something in later on, we'll talk through it as I go through and progress through the video. So I've changed the camera angle for the video today just so that you have more of a bird's eye view of the design, because I think it'll be much easier for you to follow. I've used half a block of fresh floral foam and I've attached it in 2 points to my plastic dish. Now you can make the single-ended spray as long or as short as you want it to be. So I've picked a piece of foam that I think is going to be an adequate size to make the design that I'm going to create. And this small piece of foliage that I've got here in the centre is just roughly marking where my focal point is, because I'm going to explain to you the dimensions of a single-ended spray. Now, as the word says, a single-ended spray is longer than it is shorter. So it has one side longer than the other, whereas a double-ended spray is equal on both sides and is the same construction as a top table arrangement that you might have seen me do before in a previous video. So if we think of this being our focal point, and I've got myself a tape measure just to help you, if it's a beginner, if it's the first time making this design, sometimes it's much easier to learn it in a more mathematical form. So the longer point of my single-ended spray, the longer side, I'm roughly working out as 16 inches. And I've only chosen 16 inches because that's the size that adequately fits into my camera space and suits the quantity and the size of the flowers I've got. Now, the single-ended side is 16 inches from my focal point. If we were creating a double-ended spray, then you would do equal length on the opposite side so that it was symmetrical on either side. Now my focal point for a single-ended spray isn't in the centre of my foam but 2/3 of the way back, and that's what will give it its characteristic longer side. If you have your focal point in the middle, then your proportions and your visual balance will be incorrect. So if we roughly work on 16 inches, the back portion, the shorter portion of my design, is going to be half of that length, which makes 8 inches. So if I just show you with the ruler, 8 inches from my focal point is going to be roughly there. And that means that this side is 1/3 and the other side is 2/3. So I've used 16 as my longest piece and 8 as my back section. So the back section is half of my length. And then to roughly gauge your sides, this doesn't have to be perfect, but a good example is a slightly smaller than your shorter end. So if you remember, my shorter end was 8 inches, so my sides are going to be roughly 7 inches. I'm going to keep getting my inches and my centimetres confused. So I'm working in inches. We have 16, then we have 8, then we have roughly 7 on either side, and that's going to give you almost like a kite shape in its outline shape. And what I'll do later on at the end of the video or in another video, I haven't quite decided yet, I'm going to do you a drawing on the table so that for the beginners, the ones who haven't done this style before, will understand the proportions more effectively, I think. Right, okay, so once you get more competent in flower arranging, you won't need to use any type of measure, any type of ruler to estimate your size of your arrangement. But because this is aimed at beginners, I'm going to cut my piece of foliage so it's approximately 16 inches. And that will give me my longest piece. But what you need to remember is the 16 inches is measured from your focal point here, so you can lose a small section of the length which is going to be added in and incorporated within your foam. And if I turn it this way, you'll see that I'm flat on the table, as low down as I can get, and my placement is right in the middle there of the foam. So I'm not high up, I'm down low as far as I can go, angled down towards the table. And if we look at it this way, it's angling down towards the table. And if you imagine this sitting on top of a coffin, what we are aiming to do is to hide this plastic tray and to give you a seamless join between where the flowers end and the coffin starts. So it looks natural, and you hide any of this harsh plastic base and the floral foam there underneath. Okay, so if we just come back with the tape measure, it's possibly going to be a little bit longer this time. Yeah, so my 16 inches, I'm just going to make it a slightly bit shorter. So we've now got 16 inches from this point here. So my returned end, if you remember, is going to be half of the length here. Now you can do it by eye and you can roughly estimate it, or you can do it with a tape measure. And when I'm teaching this here in the studio and I have students here with me, what I often do is mark it out on the table underneath so they have a visual reference to refer back to. So at the moment we have a longer side and a shorter side here closest to me, and this is the way I find it easier to work, with a longer length away from me and the shorter length nearest me. And then as we progress, we can turn it round and have a look at it from different directions. Now sometimes these designs end up quite oval in their outline. This is going to be a more pointed design because of the foliage that I've chosen, but often if you have rounder foliages like Floral or Pittosporum or hard ruscus, you'll end up with a rounder shape. Right, so we've done our longer length and the back of our design. Now we're going to do the sides. And if you remember when I spoke about the proportions at the beginning, it's a slightly shorter length than my returned end at the back. So I can cut that a little bit shorter. And we're aiming to have it in line with this focal reference point that I've put here on the top with this foliage. What we don't want to do is put it in the halfway position, because that then gives you equal lengths on either side. We need to remain 2/3 of the way down our floral foam. So if I just draw a line across the foam there and hold it up that way, you'll see that I have a much stronger reference point for you to look towards. So that's one side. Then I need to find myself, in this instance I'm going to do a matching piece of foliage. So we need another piece of the leather leaf. And if you want to, you can lay those two down on top of one another to get two equal lengths. Again, as you become more confident in what you do, you'll be able to do it by eye and you won't need to measure so many materials. But we've almost got that north, south, east and west position that I quite often refer to. So we have north, south, east and west. Just bring that down for you to see. And at the moment we've just got in a very basic outline, and you'll see that the height is roughly about 7 inches. At this stage we've only got a skeleton outline shape in place. At the moment we've only got 4 pieces, but if I just use garden cane there just to show you how we're going to progress with the outline shape, what we now need to do is fill in these areas in between where the greenery placements are already put. So again, if you want to leave some type of a marking in place so you can follow the outline shape, that's okay. But this is now where I get to use much shorter pieces of foliage to fill in those gaps. And this was the myrtle that we looked at a little bit earlier. And I'm going to start building up that outline shape, following that outline shape that I've created. And hopefully this makes it a lot clearer as how to create your outline shape. And only short pieces of foliage are needed here, and I'm still really low down on my floral foam. I haven't risen up on the sides. I'm still low down. I still have all this top section of foam to cover. I'm just concentrating on filling in that outline shape. And if we come back to this position here, and I use the stick again to measure from my side to my back, you're looking at filling in this section here. Now I'm using a mixture of foliages, and the better pieces for the outside are the ones that lie flat. So it can be the leatherleaf, or it can be myrtle, soft ruscus, hard ruscus, any garden foliages that you might have. But for me it looks much better when you've got flatter pieces on the outside rather than very heavy, bushy, bunchy type materials. Okay, so we've got one side completed. If I just spin it round back to that side where we have no foliage at all, and if we think of that imaginary line that runs from the top to the bottom, then that's the section that we need to fill in. And you can see why all those shorter pieces of foliage that I collected work really well in this type of design. Okay, so think of that imaginary line and keep working within that line. That one's possibly a little long, and that one's a little bit yellow in there on the end, so we'll remove that as well. Some longer pieces to come up towards that long length of foliage that we originally put in, and we get that nice shape forming there on the side. Now once you've created that outline shape, then you can start working up towards the focal area and start bringing the colours and the textures up towards the focal area. I'm just going to continue a little bit more around the outside. And then we've got that lovely shape starting to form. If I just turn that on its side, that's a better position, I think. So the longer end to the focal point here, and then on to the shorter end, and then we've got these two shorter sides. Now what we need to do is to bring the colour from the outside through to the middle and help hide this floral foam, remembering that our focal point is here. Just going to put that in a bit firmer, which is 2/3 of the way back. So we're not going central, that would make it a double-ended spray. Now if you remember back to the very beginning, I had lots of these short pieces of soft ruscus which work really well in this design, and I'm going to radiate them out from the centre so we continue that effect right the way through on the top. Okay, so now we have almost complete coverage of our floral foam. We need to leave enough space for our flower stems to go in. And if I get that garden cane back again and I do the measurement from the side, you'll see that it elevates up towards my profile point. It's not flat. It has that lovely gradient line up towards where my focal point will be, and the same on the outside. Your design has profile. If I turn it that way, you'll be able to see it more clearly. If I bring my marker in, and if I show you with my hands, it's coming up this way, away down to the point and away down to the back. And even though there are still pieces of floral foam showing, we'll be able to hide those with our flowers or by adding some extra foliage in at the end. Okay, so now we've created the outline shape, we can now add in our flowers, and I'm going to start with my smaller flower first, and that's by spray carnation. And that will help strengthen the outline on the profile of my design. Now the beauty of the spray carnations is that you can break them down and get far more heads out of the one individual stem, and the outline is there to protect your flowers, so your flowers always start within your foliage outline. So this will give me my longest length, and if you have an option at this stage, you would use your smaller flower heads towards the outside. Now this has a beautiful shape to it. If we just get rid of one of those heads, we start with a small head and we get bigger as we come to the bottom flower, so that is going to work really well on the outside of my design. And I have a fabulous shape already formed. I always say in flower arranging and commercial floristry like this, create your outline shape first, spend time on getting your outline shape properly the first time, and then your flowers will fall in line following the outline shape that you've created. Okay, so we've created the end, that's our longest end. Now we can work towards the shorter end. Now my spray carnations are quite open, so I don't have many smaller beds. So your outline is in place, then you start with your flowers inside the foliage outline that you've created. And then we can go in with our sides and equal on both sides. And we keep going until we've used up all of those spray carnations, or as many as you want to use, following that outline shape. Now again, at the moment I'm still very much low down on the table. I haven't come up towards my focal point here in the middle. I'm just making sure that the flowers are around the outside. And when I'm happy that we've got enough around the outside, then I can start bringing my flowers up towards the focal area. And we elevate these to bring them up to give us a raised profile. So hopefully you can see that teardrop shape starting to form. The shorter end is where my hand is, and the longer end is just this side here. Now I'm going to go in next with my focal flower that's going to create the focal line. So this is going to be the gerbera. And again, if we had an option with gerbera, you would start with a smaller flower further away, but generally when you're using gerbera, they tend to be very similar in their size. So I'm going to aim to have the start of my focal line. So the focal line is what draws your eye from one side of the design through to the other. And if I put my flower here in at the back, what I'm aiming to do is to have a link between this flower at the back, so the gerbera that's at the back, to the gerbera that's at the pointed end, and then we have this visual line, very much like your traditional line arrangement or your symmetric arrangement when you're learning to do them. The principles and the basic information is all exactly the same. So if you remember, my focal foliage was here. So this gerbera now becomes my focal gerbera. And what I don't want to do is go too tall at this point and make the design higher than my foliage placement. Then my final gerbera, which gives me a link between these two flowers here. So if we look at it from the front, you'll see that I have this line of gerbera coming up towards my focal flower, and then they move away towards the back of the design, giving me that strong line from front to back, which makes your eye travel up through the middle. Now I have this gorgeous pink rose, which I'm going to add to the focal area here so that we start introducing the pink colour. And it's a large head, so I'm only using 3. I think if we used any more in this design, it would become too overpowering and the scale wouldn't work very well. And what I'm going to do with these is bring them around my focal gerbera, and that really gives me a strong focal point. Just remove any petals from the outside that are slightly damaged. This is a gorgeous, gorgeous rose, one of my favourites I think at the moment. A bit shorter. And then one towards the front. So that gives me a much stronger focal area here towards the middle, a place for your eye to rest. At the moment we have this very large concentration of this mauvey pink here in the centre, which gives me a really good focal point. But the colour isn't carried through to the outside of the bouquet. It makes this area a little bit odd looking because it doesn't match anything else within the design. So this is where I'm going to now introduce the lilac-y colour, so that we get some of that pinky lilac running through right to the outer edge. And with this we do the same as we did with the spray carnations right at the very beginning. Hopefully now you can see that shape really starting to come together. I've made sure that there's an even distribution of the lilac-y colour right the way throughout the design, so we have a link between that stronger focal flower there towards the middle. And even though I'm referring to the gerbera as the focal point, these larger headed roses are also referred to as the focal flower because they're the most dominant flower within the design. And I've made sure that we have a variety of different size heads of the spray carnation, some small, some larger, and that gives us a lot more variety and interest in the design. So my final flower before I add the filler material in is the lisianthus, this lovely delicate white flower. And here we have a finished single-ended spray. So if you think about the focal point as being here, you'll see that this side of the design is longer than the returned end of the design. And then we have our widths on either side. So hopefully when we look at it from this angle, you can see that it's almost a teardrop shape. It's larger on one end than it is on the other, so it tapers away from the focal point and gives you what we call a single-ended spray.